Methylisothiazoline use and the possible link to marine organism death. An overview of the problem that's being investigated. So methylisothiazoline is used in many commercial products, namely as a preservative that acts as a preventative for any sort of microbial growth. Essentially, it's found in many things, but most namely in paper products, water used in industrial processes, paints, adhesive and coating materials, jet fuel, as well as very commonly found in cosmetics. So this can be soaps or shampoos, things that you would typically rinse off right away, as well as things that you might leave on for a while, like makeup, topical leave-ins like a leave-in conditioner, bronzers. It's actually found quite commonly in self-tanners. It's also found in baby wipes, which is quite concerning. It's found additionally in sunscreens and many other topical products. It's also found in over-the-counter and prescription medications. It can be found in pesticides. Most likely anything that's water-based, you might find methylisothiazoline. It's quite the mouthful to say. There's many names for this chemical. From here on out, I'm going to refer to it as MIT, which it's commonly known as for short. One thing to note is that it has many trade names and registered names, and so the products that you purchase, it might be listed under something completely different than MIT or methylisothiazoline. And I'm sure I butchered that last time. So I'm going to go ahead and refer to this as MIT from here on out, but just remember that when you're purchasing products, it might be really hard to figure out whether or not this chemical is found in the products that you are using. And that's part of the problem that we're going to investigate here. So MIT is harmful to humans. It's toxic if it is swallowed, if it comes in contact with your skin. It's an eye irritant, and it actually can be an inhalation irritant. So this product, if it's being used in a commercial setting, the employees that come into contact with it regularly are required to wear personal protective equipment. So if you think about it, this product that you're putting on your skin or using to wash your hair or your body, or even using an over-the-counter or prescription medication, if this is used as a preservative in any of those products, as well as those baby wipes that you're using on your children, it's namely fairly toxic enough to have to be protected against the skin for those workers who are coming into contact with it quite frequently. So if you're using products that you have in your home quite frequently, you might want to consider, either using protective equipment or maybe just not using that product at all. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The toxin that's causing these deaths of marine animals could be linked to MIT pretty easily. So one thing to note is the ecological effects of MIT. MIT has been moderately to practically non-toxic to birds as far as research shows, but it's moderately to highly toxic to freshwater and marine organisms. Now, mind you, this information comes from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and this was a study done by the EPA back in 1998, so over 20 years ago. The ecological effects and risk assessment hasn't really been updated since that time at all by the EPA. I scoured their website and could find no new information other than what was published in 1998 about MIT. There are some basically discharge requirements or requirements of how this is supposed to be disposed of on a commercial level, but the fact remains that it's found in many products that are over the counter or in household cleaners or in household products that you're using topically on your body or even ingesting as a medication. With that said, the quantitative risk assessment for the environment has not been done, so we're not really sure how this affects affects the environment. We just know that it's pretty toxic, and we also know a few other things about it. I want to take a moment to note the sulfur on this chemical right here. This is going to play a big role in what happens with MIT when it is introduced into the environment. So MIT is fatal to fish. I was able to find a study on zebrafish embryos that were exposed to MIT. And essentially what they found was that there was a decrease in hatchability, a quite notable one in fact, and larvae survival. And so many of the larvae fish were not able to survive past that larval stage. What happened was that the fish that did survive, they had a notably shorter lifespan, and they were also notably smaller in size. What they found in this study was that the zebrafish larvae that were exposed to MIT had an epigenic deregulation of miRNAs. So essentially their genes didn't quite form properly. And so this had an effect on thyroid hormone regulation. They also noticed that there was a high level of toxicity for these fish. And so this was something that affected them for the lifespan and not just when they were in that larval stage. So let's look at how MIT affects humans to better understand how it may affect fish. So MIT binds to the plasma membrane and the inner wall of vacuoles in the cell, and essentially causes a rupture of that membrane, of that and the nuclear envelope. So basically it renders the cell ineffective. It basically kills the cell. Overall, for the entire body of the fish, you can learn more about this in a link to my toxic chemical fact sheet and a link to my metabolic process fact sheet. But basically, in a nutshell, what happens is that it renders the fish unable to regulate its hormones. And hormones are responsible for so many different functions in a body. The endocrine system is quite major when it comes to how a body functions. And this could be, metabolically when it comes to digestive systems. It could also be, in the reproductive systems of an animal. In addition to that, the hormones regulate when someone should go to sleep or when they should initiate fight or flight. Hormones are linked to major processes within a body. So to continue that, one thing that we have to consider is the efficacy of MIT. And so MIT as a chemical compound is very stable, which is, great for the process of, antimicrobial growth, but at the same time, it makes it really hard to, rid MIT as a chemical in our environment. So its efficacy is also compounded when it is combined with other chemicals. So just MIT in and of itself, fairly stable, very effective, but when combined with other chemicals, extremely effective. And, those other chemicals, I'm not going to go into how those are going to degrade, but I will talk briefly about how MIT degrades. So the maximum level of MIT in personal care products is 15 parts per million. It's fairly small if you think about it. With that said, its efficacy in very low concentrations with a water solubility involved, as well as being hard to degrade, creates quite a recipe for disaster. So how might this have come into contact with fish? Well, I've kind of touched on this, but I'm going to go into it a little bit further. So if you think about the cosmetic products that you're using, you're probably going to wash those off at the end of the day. Maybe it's shampoo or conditioner and you're going to wash it off right away. So there are regulations as far as how this is supposed to be disposed, this particular chemical, but we're talking on a commercial level. So if you're rinsing off your conditioner in your shower or washing off your makeup from from the end of the day, or even just tossing those baby wipes into the trash can, you're not going to think about what regulations are involved in order to dispose of this properly. You're probably not even aware that MIT is involved in the products that you're using, or even that it is this harmful. So when it comes to pesticides that are being used, we're spraying that directly on plants. And so that's immediately entering the environment without any sort of, proper disposal process being involved. So the wastewater from facilities that are using MIT, maybe they have some regulations that are involved with those permits back from 1998. But the thing about it is that we all know that there are times when companies have chemical spills or leaks, and also companies that are not following regulations as they're supposed to, especially regulations that are outdated. So the thing about MIT is that it's not super susceptible to degradation in water unless there's a couple of specific environmental conditions that are happening. So this means that the potential for it to persist in our natural environment is probably fairly likely, but the effect of this has not been assessed like we talked about earlier. So in order for MIT to degrade in the environment, there needs to be an ozonation process. While this is possible naturally, essentially through UV rays hitting the top of water and then breaking down a chemical, it's not going to happen at all levels of water. So the chemical compound of MIT, if you look at it structurally, it is heavier than the chemical compound for water. And so what's going to happen is that chemical is going to, start at the top, and it's going to slowly make its way down, coming into contact with everything that it meets. So for ozonation to happen, for MIT to be broken down, oxidization of that sulfur atom, which I showed you earlier, is essentially the part of the process that needs to happen. And so that may happen on the surface of the water, but it's not going to happen all the way down. And by that time, it's already come into contact with many marine organisms. With that said, it's obviously not easily degraded, and it's leaked into our waterways in mass quantities, just given the use of the range of products that are available. Fish are very likely being affected by this chemical among a potential host of others, and we briefly talked about the fact that, MIT is really effective on its own, but it's also extremely effective when used in combination with other chemicals. Given that there have been no new publications on MIT since 1998 by the EPA, I think it should be considered as a likely cause for marine death, and that it should be further investigated, especially when it comes to the long-term environmental impacts. I also think that, as a consumer, it might be a good idea to look at the products that you use regularly in your home and try to decipher whether or not MIT is involved, and maybe think about purchasing a product that doesn't have MIT in it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.